This podcast is brought to you by the Prospect Research Institute, a vibrant online learning community providing high-quality educational content, the opportunity to connect with peers, and an outlet for new ideas in the field of nonprofit fundraising research.
So we're back to hire good teams. Well, okay, find good donors.
Welcome to Prospect Research Chat Bites, a podcast by and for prospect research professionals. I'm Jennifer Filla. Today, I'm talking with Tim Horton, principal of Vector VC, a venture capital firm.
Thank you for joining me, Tim. I'm excited to hear more about what you do for a living. And in particular, before we jump into anything, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and how Vector VC came to be, if you're willing to share.
I can. There's about 4 versions of the story, depending on which one of the partners you talk about and who we're trying to impress or lie to. But
okay.
the homogenized, relatively straight answer to the story is that I ran radio and TV stations for 20 years and was written up in Billboard and Radio and Records and all the industry trade magazines as, whiz-bang college boy, and was both lucky enough and obnoxiously egotistical enough to think I was amazing, and found a mentor who was willing to, hire my young, inexperienced, egotistical self and plug me into some really interesting assignments where I came out of radio as a programmer. I was on the air, did some DJ work, but thought of myself as a business manager and a programmer, and that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a DJ, but that was I liked radio as a media, and I liked radio as a business because it really is. Back in the day, I'll make several dinosaur jokes, I'm sure, today, but back in the day when the magma was still cooling and the dinosaurs were still roaming the earth, radio was very local to each town or city. And so all my stations were country music. So a Kenny Rogers song sounds like a Kenny Rogers song, and a Willie Nelson song sounds like a Willie Nelson song. And the difference between a country music radio station in New York City, which I did, and Birmingham, Alabama, and Dallas, Texas, and LA is what wraps around the songs. It's what makes it sound like the city. One of the reasons why I retired and got out was the homogenization of radio that most people hear today and don't know the difference is in fact that very bland, non-specific radio. All my stations were successful and winners, with the exception of one example, because they sounded like the town and were very involved with the city or the metro where they were located. Anyway, so I was a business guy. It was all about ad sales, making the stations profitable so that I had a bigger budget to go buy, another remote broadcast truck to be at the concert, or give away T-shirts, or hire somebody extra, or that kind of stuff. That was my perspective. And so as I progressed through my career, had a little bit of success, and discovered that I really liked the business end, but I was way too young. I was the whiz-bang kid, and nobody in my era took me seriously, because in the day, all of the senior executives of these corporate radio owner groups were back then the age I am today. So I'm very sensitive to young folks with good ideas today, because I know how it feels to be treated that way. But it really annoyed me, and so I walked away. Had an opportunity to build one last radio station. I owned a piece because I negotiated it. So the answer to your question is the last station I built was both skill and luck, hugely successful. And the owner was able to buy it, ran it, and sold it, flipped it in 2 years, and made a huge amount of money, of which I had a piece. So that was the initial capital funding for what is now Vector VC. And it includes my sister, who is an MBA banker, or was. She's doing the mommy track now. And 3 friends, one of which who sadly passed away in a weird car accident years ago. And so we started initially by looking for a business that we could buy, because my father was a salaryman. It's a Japanese term, but he was a upper middle management executive at a Fortune 500 company. And he always wanted to own his own company, but he had kids at home and a white picket fence and rent to pay, and, never could bring himself to make the transition because of the demands he had. And so when he retired at the usual time in his career, I had already retired, and we went looking for a business to buy for him. And in that research process, we discovered that the businesses that he wanted to own were awful, awful businesses. I'm not even going to mention what it is, because somebody might be in that business who listens, but it was an awful business. It was very mature industry, no growth. It was just awful. But anyway, we decided that wasn't going to work and moved on to finding an open spectrum of other things. Parallel with that, the dot-com 90s came along. And again, depending on who I'm telling this story to, we were either really, really smart or really, really lucky in the dot-com 90s and made a bunch of money. And that's a different kind of investing, even if you're on the board, as I was, of some companies. Buying shares of stock and arbitraging, publicly traded stock is a very different thing than what I do now. We got to the end of the 90s, early 2000s, and decided that we were on too many mailing lists. The venture capital thing started to explode with the 90s. We got on too many mailing lists, and we're getting literally 200, 250 emails a day from people begging for money from our investment fund for their startup to be the next dot-com genius. So through the 2000s, we opened our own businesses. We had several business ideas. There were some dot-coms, some architecture things, a trade show company, believe it or not, small group of mattress stores. I mean, a whole diversity of weird stuff. Without much in the way of a strategic plan, we found things that came to us, and or part of the 6 of us stumbled across opportunities we could buy in or take over other people's business, grow. So during the 2000s, we did our own. When we arrived at 2009, we started to spin off a lot of those or close them and walk away from them. They were profitable. We only really had one loser. Cut that one off pretty quick. But for a variety of reasons, we had moved on. So we either closed them, sold them, whatever. And everybody else moved on to other things in their life. And so I'm now pretty much the visible investor for Vector VC, because I go to the Million Cups events. I go to the entrepreneurial startup events, a couple of university things, both in Tampa, where I live, in Orlando, which is close by, and Atlanta, where I have business interest and I'm up there with some regular basis. So I go to those startup meetings, and I speak at some of the entrepreneurial university events. So that, interestingly, giving, if you will, to encouraging the entrepreneurial community makes me visible in ways that the old early days .com beg for money mailing list didn't do. Allows me to stumble across, nice business opportunities that I can be on the board or invest in or whatnot, help companies grow. So it's very, the era has changed. The social context in which I find opportunities and get to know people is different now than, of course, it would have been in the 90s or even in the early 2000s. It's evolved over time. There's essentially 4 life cycles or generations for what and how Vector VC evolved and operates.
So it sounds like it's hard to pin you down with a name or a definition. We're calling you venture capitalist, but you're many things.
Well, and a lot of these terms, I really dislike the Shark Tank TV show. I don't nearly mean it the way that sounds up front, but the show is misleading. I actually know Mark Cuban, have bought from Robert, and was almost going to do some business with Richard for a period of window of time. It never happened. So it's not them specifically that I have a problem with. It's the concept of the show. It gives the incorrect impression of the cycle of venture capital. People who don't know and have what I call wishing dreams that they could have start a company don't realize. I'll tell you the secret. The next time you watch the show, you'll spot this right away once I've told you. But people who don't know how the process works don't realize that it's all compressed down for the entertainment value of TV. It is no more reality than the Kardashian show is a reality show. It's all manufactured television drama. The companies that make it through the screening process long before you see them on TV are all companies that are relatively decent size, looking for an investment. They need to explode the size of their company, but they are a substantial company, revenue flowing, almost always profitable. That's not absolutely true, but almost always profitable. And they have a hard product, not a service, and very rarely a .com idea, apps and website stuff. They come up with about 10 or 12 finalists for every show. And depending on who the sharks are, because the list has evolved over time, they select the companies to present that are likely to get a successful deal, because that's what the TV wants for the drama of the TV show. So when Ashton Kutcher joined for a period of time, there was more .com-y stuff. Before he came, there were more socks and shoes, and we have a product to sell type thing. So it's evolved, and I have no vested interest in any of this, by the way. But if I can suggest a TV show for people who want to see how real investors want to work, I would suggest that people watch a TV show called The Profit. It's on a CNBC, which is the same channel. There's a guy by the name of Marcus Lemonis, and his show is different in the sense that it shows the sausage being made. You don't see the sausage being made on the Shark Tank. They come in, they're an existing company, and they pitch, we have this thing, these are our plans, and this is how much money we made, and the sharks are interested, yes or no, and maybe you hear a follow-up later. With Marcus's show, The Profit, he goes in, and you see the meeting and the negotiation where he essentially takes control of the company, by the way, but shows how to make a company profitable. Let's sell and focus on this product more because it's profitable. Let's reduce or delete this line of product and inventory because that doesn't make us any money. Change our graphics, fix the website. Sometimes it's real basic pedestrian stuff that he does, but it turns the company around and makes it profitable. And so every situation's different, but if people want to watch a show about how to find an investor and what that investor's expectation is going to be, I wholly suggest that they watch Marcus's show, not Mark Cuban's. And so people come at you with this odd perception of what a venture capitalist is. And the terms get bandied about and misused too. They all had an early germination in the early .com 90s, but now they're used interchangeably. Used to be angel investors, which is a term people toss around. Used to be angel investors were people of substance, let's say, family, friends, neighbors, cousins, somebody you knew from college, your girlfriend's dad who was a lawyer, somebody you went to high school with whose dad is a banker, people that have substantial wealth. And they were called angel investors because they would come to the rescue and give you money with little or no expectation that there was going to be a huge return later. I always used to tell folks that I did the opposite, which is vulture. And I would go into companies that were struggling and buy them up at a discount because they were troubled, fix them, and sell it and make money. So I was a vulture as opposed to an angel. Venture capitalists in the early days were essentially bankers who were willing to take the higher risk for the higher reward. So those are the three terms. Well, now you rarely hear vulture investor anymore, but angel and venture capitalists now are somewhat morphed and interchanged depending on the spin that somebody wants and the fundraising that they're trying to do for the business. If it's really small and they don't know how profitable the company is going to be, they think they want an angel investor. And if they think they know what their profit margin is going to be and they need really big money, then they claim that they want a venture capitalist. But it's all sort of morphed into one thing.
Well, that's helpful. It's good to hear your perspective on that. Hearing you talk about how your company has changed or how your involvement has changed over the years, I'm really curious to know what your motivation is for investing in a business. What is it now?
Well, now, quite frankly, it's more fun than it is investing. And by that I mean I'm able to pick and choose the things that I'm interested in, or I think are interesting, or I think are cool, or I think have the prospects of being just amazing. So you're right. My perceptions evolved. I don't want to get very specific, but I have three active, what I call local investments going on now. Two in Tampa, one in Atlanta. The one in Atlanta is some version of a telecommunications type company. And the two in Tampa, one is a specialty retail store product, and the other one is a services company, financial services company. And I came across all of them by accident. They did not get my interest because of their elevator pitch. In the case of two of them, I found them, not the other way around. I was at meetings and heard them pitch. They didn't even know I was in the room. So now I'm able to do what I think is interesting. But even today, for a variety of reasons, there are more ideas and opportunities I walk away from than ones that I follow through and interested in. And so that's just as true today as it was back when we were literally buying stock in little small micro cap companies. We always had more ideas than we had money to spend, and now I have more ideas than I have time to spend.
Well, that's a good problem. I'm curious, now that you get to focus on the things that you like and kind of have fun with that, do you typically have an exit strategy in mind, or does the exit strategy evolve as you get to know the company better?
That's a really interesting question, because the answer is everybody thinks they have an exit strategy, but nobody really does. I'm just the only one honest enough to tell you I have not a clue. Now, there is an exit strategy, there is a plan, but they always evolve. I went blowing past an example, but we had a little cluster of mattress stores at a window of time. Fell into it by accident. Friend of a friend of a friend, I got introduced to somebody. They were running a single mattress store. And he had operational problems. Don't forget to come back and ask me the two reasons why I like one company versus another as an investment. But he was running a single mattress store. And he was not an operational businessman. He was a guy who saw an opportunity, opened a store. He was profitable, but operationally, he was all over the map. His books were bad, his taxes were bad, his inventory was bad, his advertising was bad. It was awful. But because he was enthusiastic and he worked 836 hours a week, he made money, a little bit of money. So I went in, cleaned up the single store's process, and sadly discovered that, because he was not a good businessman, that he was seriously in tax liability, and they were almost literally ready to come handcuff him and take him off to tax jail. We don't have debtor prison in this country, but they will send you to prison for not paying your taxes.
Yeah.
And so he was, it's a funny story now, but he was really right there. I mean, he was in deep caca. And so me and someone else who was a business friend in the area of his, who was not in the mattress business but was a operational businessman, had come in and was trying to help him. And both of us keep saying to ourselves, you know, this is a nice little business if you could pay attention and pay your taxes. And so he gave up the business, and because of the tax liability, we didn't buy it from him, but we started our own. And he was my new partner was the operations guy, and I was the marketing, advertising, money guy, and we ended up with multiple stores. When we saw the original store, the exit strategy was go in, help him make the store profitable, and receive some version of a dividend, a paycheck, quarterly payment, dividend, whatever form that income took. And that was fine. The business had a problem. It evolved. So we started our own business with one location store. And the plan was, let's get it up and running, hire people to run it, and pay ourselves a dividend or a profit payment off of that. We couldn't find enough quality people to run the one store. So my partner ended up being in the store a lot, general managing the store. And we opened a second one to diversify the workload. And then we diversified with a third one and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, we competitively arrived at a scenario where, and no matter where somebody in the country hears this, you'll recognize this, the mom and pop mattress stores are in danger because the franchise stores, famously Mattress Firm and those types, but even Macy's and places like that, do some strategic things that just make it tough for local mom and pops to compete. So we arrived at a business plan where our original goal of taking a dividend wasn't going to be viable. We had to make a choice of expand to 12, 15 stores and make it into a regional chain with all the encumbrance and corporate structure that would require, or close down the stores we had and just walk away. We were outside our leases and contracts, so it was an option. And my operations partner didn't want to run 15 mattress stores, and I couldn't run 15 mattress stores because of other things I was doing in my life. And so that's why we walked away. We just literally Thanksgiving weekend, Saturday and Sunday, went to the store and cleaned out the rental space, took the signage down, turned off the lights, and walked away.
Wow, that worked out well.
Yeah, that was our exit strategy. So it makes a good example of what's the exit strategy. You have a plan. Everybody has a plan, but the plan is always going to change. Even in the most ideal scenario, the plan's going to change. Mark Zuckerberg's plan has changed. Everybody's plan changes. So the answer is, sure, you need a plan going in. You'll use a different plan, hopefully profitably getting out. But yes, everybody needs a plan.
But it sounds as though you're different from the, how do I want to put this, like a sort of corporate venture capitalist. It sounds like you're so curious about how businesses work and how they're failing that you're willing to jump in and use your hands and work on that business, even where you started a whole new one to see how that would work. And then you carefully evaluate what's happening, and you're just very realistic about those numbers. There's less sentiment involved. Does that sound accurate?
Well, and that is accurate. And so I'm gonna libel and slander the famous venture capital folks out on Sand Hill Road here, but I'm gonna do it on purpose. But again, people forget. First of all, the internet's a teenager. All the errors, the security leaks problems, and banking problems and identity theft and all this stuff, the internet's a teenager. When the internet's a middle-aged 45-year-old thing, it'll be very different than it is now. The internet's very different now than it was in 1993, 94, 95 when I was making my first websites. I mean, I've been on the internet since before AOL was mailing discs out. And all the old folks listening to this podcast are laughing, rolling on the floor, and anybody under about 35 didn't get that joke. But it's evolved. So the big venture capital firms, Kleiner Perkins is the famous one, but the big venture capital firms are working with OPM, other people's money.
Right.
And that changes their perspective. They have committees, and there's nothing wrong with this, by the way, but they have committees, they have accountability in ways I don't, because it's my money, I can do whatever I want. Not really, but sort of. And so they have levels of folks that need to be in place to churn through and to skim through that 250 emails a day I used to get, story I told you, to find that very, very few that fit the criterion that they have to have. Those big venture capital firms have to find the business that will scale to the size to take them public so that they can exit. They're not interested in doing, and I'm going to circle back around to this, but they're not interested in doing a couple of mattress stores in Tampa, Florida. And they're not interested in investing in a guy like me or my partner. Let's pick on him. My partner and the guy we started with that had the tax problem, they're not interested in investing in their business because they can hire mattress retail industry experts and start their own. So, the business that they have to find, that they have to invest in, is skewed and is colored by their need for the obvious exit plan that they have to have. I don't. I've got one that's been bubbling along for 10 years. It's a profitable business. Again, we're not going to talk about the specifics, but it's a profitable business, not nearly what I expected it would be, but it's a profitable business. It's an ongoing enterprise, minimal annoyance in my life, doesn't take a lot of my attention because I have really, really sharp people that are part equity owners running it. So essentially I get nothing more than a dividend and a conference call every 2-3 weeks, what's going on. But we had a plan to run that thing for 4 or 5 years and buy and flip it. And we couldn't buy it and flip it because of some unrelated industry things happened, nothing to do with us. And so the business now is an ongoing business. One of my partners who went into the business as the operations general manager, COO, was going to be there for 6 months before we hired somebody. He decided he liked the business. He enjoys that business and that industry's trade shows and the social aspect of the business. He's still there. The business is fine, nicely profitable, but it's never going to be the business that we expected it would be. Now, a big venture capital firm like Kleiner Perkins or any of the guys out on Sand Hill Road, famous Silicon Valley, would have never tolerated that. They would have sold it, dumped it, flipped it, crashed it. They would have done something because they needed that working capital for the next great whiz-bang idea that came along. So there's a whole spectrum of folks that do, let's call it investing in business ideas. And depending on what kind of business you have and how it's going to scale, I have this conversation with interviews all the time where the subject matter is how to look for money, not like you do, but how to look for money to invest and grow your business. So it depends on what kind of business you have and how much money you need and how much equity you're willing to give up in trade, by the way, to define your target of who you want to ask for money. And it's much like what you do, too, by the way.
Well, that brings us around to, you wanted me to remind you, there were 2 reasons that you have that you would prefer to invest in one company over another?
Yeah, well, the two are incredibly obvious once you know what they are. Again, back to Marcus Lemonis' TV show and Shark Tank, that you don't really see it. And that is, number one, nobody invests in a business. You invest in people. I'm trying to think of an obvious example, but in the early days, nobody bought into Warren Buffett's money fund because he was making great returns. I mean, he was, and that's what got him famous, much more so back in the day than he's, legend now. But they invested in his fund because Warren and Charlie Munger were really, really smart guys, and they were really, really good at what they did, and they had a good team who could go out and find, hey, let's buy Dairy Queen. Hey, let's go buy this insurance company. Hey, let's go buy, right? Yeah. They invested in really, really smart people who are really, really good at whatever their thing is, running a mattress store and remembering to pay your taxes, or Warren Buffett buying Dairy Queen. That's what you invest in, is people. Yeah, the returns are nice, but you invest in people, not the business. You invest in the people. And the second thing is, and this one varies, but the second thing is, what's the competitive advantage in the marketplace for whatever that company's going to be able to do? Is it me too as a business, or is it going to be a market leader? Even if you come to a marketplace late, if you can take over and be the leader, if you can be McDonald's and Burger King, then that's a prospect. Everybody has a Bob's Burgers, Joe's hamburger stand on the side of the road. And if you know the story about how McDonald's came from, the McDonald's brothers had a single store location, and a guy who was a sales rep trying to sell milkshake machines drove by their store and couldn't sell them a milkshake machine, but he liked their hamburger stand, and that was Ray Kroc. So, he invested in what he saw that the business was going to do, what the McDonald's brothers were doing. So yes, it's money, but you invest in teams and you invest in a niche, which brings me to the punchline I always include at this point, which is, please don't call me and tell me you want to invest in your idea because you have the next Facebook. Nobody has the next Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg didn't have the next Facebook. By the way, everybody remembers MySpace. Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook was not the next MySpace. It was Facebook. It was different. It was a different thing. That is my current best example of, and it's not exactly a perfect example because that's not why MySpace failed, but the point is, if you've got an idea, if you've got a business plan, don't come to me, don't come to other investors and say, I'm going to be the next Burger King. I'm going to be the next Facebook. And please don't come and tell me you're going to be the next Yahoo. That right now is not probably a good pitch.
Well, this is a wonderful segue to philanthropy, because when you make a gift, you are giving away money without a return, but there is a return. You're investing in that organization and its mission. Do those two reasons, investing in people and investing in leaders, does that apply to the way you see philanthropy?
Well, and mine's odd because I do, let's call it, two different channels. I have a historical legacy, emotional connection to one we'll talk about. And then there are some political and personal reasons why I do some stuff that we do now that I never would have done 20 years ago. So when I was a kid, I grew up in Memphis, and we would collect our pennies, nickels, and dimes for St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital back in the day when Danny Thomas was a big star and was in town and was the chief cheerleader for this medical research facility called St. Jude's. So I have always, to one degree or another, through various corporate structures, always gifted and participated in the work that St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital does. So, yes, I got started. I continue. It's an emotional connection from my childhood, and that's okay. But they've done their job too by sticking to the mission and efficiently using my dollars. The flip side of the story, I'll skip across my personal history, but there are a lot of problems in the African continent that are rooted in the lack of capitalism, lack of a local economy. We'll keep this very broad. I don't want to get too political about Somalia pirates and Islamic refugees and a lot of this dramatic tragedy we see on TV now, but almost all of that is unnecessary because collectively the West has ignored the African continent for 40 years. Since after, well, more than that, since after World War II, hell, between the First and the Second World War, they ignored the African continent. And because in an absence of a vacuum, these tribal leaders run the country. And we've all, depending on how old you are, you all know the names of the famous warlords, and we don't have to go there. But they were all able to be successful at being evil because there was no local economy. And there are still parts of the African continent today, and this is sad but very true. There are lots of places in the African continent where the average 25 to, if he's lucky, 40-year-old man doesn't have the concept of an economy. They've never seen it. They don't know it. They don't understand it. The concept of, I leave my home, I go to this place, I perform some function we call a job, I'm given some compensation, and I take that and go to a store and buy food to take home to my family. That basic capitalist concept doesn't exist. So how can you expect that the Somali pirates aren't seeing their job opportunity being getting on a dinghy and going out in the ocean and hijacking a tanker? I mean, their only job available is to join a warlord and be a soldier and go steal stuff from the other warlord that's not as strong as the guy they work for. So politically, it's a problem, and so there are some NGOs and some other things that we support multiple places in the world where they try and go in and fix that kind of basic infrastructure, do education, not about civics and capitalism, but do education for the next generation, work on building an economy, micro loans. If we give you, a pig and a sow, all of a sudden you have a pig farm, chickens, goats, sheep. Now you have an economy. You sell a sheep to the guy across town who makes shoes, and he gives your kids shoes, and those kind of really early stage basic things are really tough and hard to do in a lot of the world. And so, because of my politics and some other things that I saw in my life and parts of the world I traveled to, those are one of the things that we do. So that one is almost the opposite of St. Jude's. I grew up with St. Jude's, and that's my emotional tie. And the stuff we do now with the NGOs is, what we selectively choose to do for political reasons to help the betterment of the world. Let's get an economy going, because if they had a stable economy, we wouldn't have the refugee problem, we wouldn't have the crime lord problem, we wouldn't have the, lots of problems in that part of the world would tend to generationally go away if we had done that kind of work in the 40s, in the 50s after the war, in the 60s, in the 70s, wait a minute, in the 80s, wait a minute, in the 90s. What year is it now? Yeah, exactly. So.
I hear you. Very true. So you have emotional reasons for giving, political reasons. Are there any business reasons that you give?
Well, there are some small mentor things that I like. I have a little effort that I put into a children's mentor program that's local here to Tampa, Florida, where I live. But that really is more time than it is money. I mean, there is a little money there, but that's more time than it is money. And for a variety of reasons, that particular organization's not going to get a lot more money because they have a scaling problem. Their size is such that they have a real good impact on the kids, the at-risk kids that they work with, but they don't have the administrative infrastructure in place to triple the size of that agency or make it statewide Florida. I mean, it's probably a goal they think they have, but operationally they don't have the executives and the manpower in place. So that one gets more of my time than it actually gets cash. So everyone's different. I get asked a lot. It tends to be easier today to get money from me if you ask for my time and my help than if you just ask for my money. But that's just me at the point I'm at in my life.
And is there a culture that you see with individuals like you who invest in businesses, a culture of either giving in philanthropy or not giving? Is there anything you see as a trend across people who invest like you do?
No, not really. I think it all comes back to, who you are as a person, your life experience, how you were raised as a kid. I mean, I'm in my 50s and I think more now about, what would my mommy say about what I did today now than I did in my 20s when she was alive. Mm-hmm. So this is completely unfair. But if you were raised right, you tithed at church, and you collected nickels and pennies for St. Jude's at school, and, you do all of those things, it becomes a lifelong habit. If in doing what you do, if your research is just looking for people who, quote unquote, got rich and expecting that now all of a sudden they're going to be philanthropic or donor to a cause or volunteer their time, that's probably a real hard river to row a boat on because they don't have any life experience or they don't have any personal history of actually doing it. The soft touch, if you will, is probably the folks who donate now. It's the opposite of the old joke about if you need a job done, find a busy person and give it to them. Well, if you need to raise some money, find somebody who's donating a lot of money and get some more from them. There's probably an awful lot of people who really hate me right now, but the point I've made, I think, is valid. It's my opinion is that's reasonably probably where you're going to be able to mine the most successful prospects will be the people who are churched and donate to their church, who do donate their time to this charity or that one, or they walk in the 5K, or, those kind of social things now that all the fundraisers do.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because in our field, prospect research, it's usually I would say, and I hope I don't get into trouble, it's usually the fundraisers who will come to someone like me and suggest that those wealthy people on the beach, if they could just get their contact information, then they would have the donors they need. And my pushback has always been what we call philanthropic inclination or interest in your cause. You really need both of those. So we're always looking for what we call indicators. And what I'm hearing you say is that when we see those social things, not just I gave 100,000, because as you mentioned, you're very private and a lot of your giving is anonymous. But when we see that socially they're philanthropic, they are participating in their friends' 5K to raise money for St. Jude's or other things like that, that those are valid indicators of some philanthropic inclination.
Well, and you're right, and so I'm glad I made my comment before you did, because I didn't want to, I don't want anybody to think that I was being led. But you're right, and here's something else too. And again, I have some experience because in my business life, I had to do a very little bit of it, asking for other investors' money. But for the majority, I've never had to go ask for money. I've always been the person getting asked. So my perspective's a little odd. But for the folks that are listening, especially if they're fundraisers or looking to raise capital, I would suggest to you that the social aspect is the way you're going to find the active donors that you probably want, which may not be the ones you fantasize and dream about. If you could get Bill Gates on the phone, and you can't, by the way, but if you could get Bill Gates on the phone and you said, hey, look, I'm in name of major city, and we have this charitable thing we do, and our total budget for the year is, I don't know, just pick numbers. Our total budget for the year is, $100,000 a month. That's our running expense rate, or what we need for capital funding. And Bill Gates would write you a check for whatever that's going to be, $1,200,000 for the year. You're jumping up and down, woohoo, you've got your funding done for a year. I would suggest to you that your problem is going back to Bill Gates the next year to get more money, because you're dependent upon him, whereas the alternative would be if you could go find 10 people who would write you $10,000 a month, either a month or annually. Now, if that donor pool, somebody dies in a car wreck, Bill Gates decides he doesn't like you anymore, you get somebody who changes their mind or for whatever reason rotates where they donate their money, and that happens. Now, you only have to replace one of the 10, hopefully, one of the 10, not 100% of your ask. And so those folks who call you, my opinion, but those folks who call you and want to get the email and phone number for the quote-unquote rich person living on the beach in Reddington Shores, Florida, or Sarasota, or what have you, they're flighty as hell. They're undependable. And so, as my daddy used to tell me, be careful what you ask for. Somebody might give it to you. Would you take the $1,200,000 in my example from Bill Gates? Oh, hell yeah. I'd snap it right up. But the next day, after you recover from the company party celebrating, self-congratulating yourself about how wonderful you are, you probably need to get back on the phone and find those 10 people who are going to do the $10,000 a month donor, in my bad example, because those are the folks that are likely to donate for 5 years, for 10 years, forever, to put you in the estate plan, to do all that bigger stuff that you hope that they would do. In a couple of years, they've done some volunteer work for the organization, and now all of a sudden, they sold their company, or now all of a sudden they're Bill Gates mega rich, bad example. But so now that person who did $10,000 a month, now they'll write the check for the $1.2 million and help you raise a replacement person doing the $10,000 a month. So we're back to hire good teams. Well, okay, find good donors. Find donors that are going to be emotionally invested in your cause. And there's lots of causes, and everybody wants to hit on the same mystical, magical, theoretical, 5 rich guys who live in the fancy house on the beach in Florida. There's a whole population of donors out there that aren't being touched. I'll tell you, there's a whole population of donors out that aren't being touched. And I'm not in that uber rich club by any stretch of the imagination, so I don't pop up on those lists of, rich guys living on a condo in the beach in Florida. I don't like that lifestyle even if I had the money, but you get my point.
Yes, and there are many quiet but wealthy, or I should say modest but wealthy individuals who could benefit organizations. But I want to bring you back to the Children's Mentor Program, because you're talking about benefiting both ways, really. And you, as a prudent donor, you don't want to give to them more than they can use, to keep that simple. Operationally, they can't scale. Like, as a person who works with businesses, you're evaluating them and saying to yourself, I can't give them $15 million because they're not going to be able to use that effectively. So it makes me wonder, are you the kind of person that might invest in an organization? In other words, partnering with that organization, both with your money, but your expertise. Has that ever been on the radar, or have you ever thought about doing something like that to take a nonprofit organization to a new level?
Well, I did one years ago. It was a friend of a friend. It was new to me because I was ill-informed. Now I see it pop up as a business model probably anecdotally twice a year because I don't go looking for it. But I had a friend of a friend type introduction who wanted to start, let's call it a charter school in Atlanta for kids on the autism spectrum, where they could address specifically their needs. And starting what is now generally referred to as a charter school, which is not what it was called back then, but what people now know as a charter school, was a huge undertaking. I mean, there were capital requirements for buildings and people and ongoing revenue demands for payroll. And, I mean, it's just a huge undertaking having nothing to do with helping serving the kids, which was the whole point. And I spent a lot of time working on that, which is the window of time that I mentioned that, I spent a little window of time asking for money, not being asked. That was it. And I was going to my investor community friends and trying to, see what I could do in the way of a business model, because it wasn't, that particular example wasn't going to be a charity in the sense that it was donor supported. It was going to be mostly parental supported, paid daycare. A lot of folks on the autism spectrum get government checks of one form or another for support, so they could afford to pay for school. Let's leave it at that. And so it was a business model, but that expertise got used in that, what I consider to be charitable function, but had to come up with a viable business plan so it would be self-sustaining 10, 20 years down the road versus let's just collect a bunch of donor money and do this for a year or two till the money runs out and we can't find any donors. That entity exists in a very different form than we originally planned it back then, for reasons having nothing to do with me. I was long gone by the time they evolved it. And today I know of it, again, accidentally, and I don't know them in any detail, but I know 3 charter school-ish educational facilities that are operating around the country doing a version of that business model. And by all accounts are probably successful at doing it. So yes, the emotional helps, getting people involved helps.
Well, I really appreciate how you shared with us your examples and the reasons that you give, especially, is interesting to everyone. Is there anything I missed? Should I have asked you something that I didn't that you'd like to share?
Oh, I don't know. It's I would imagine within the niche of what you do and the people who are going to be prone to listen to this, just remember that you're hiring good people. You're essentially hiring donors, right? But you're hiring good people. So talk to folks. Don't self-select out. There's a lot of, famously, the guy wrote the book about the neighbor next door type scenario. There's a lot of folks that have an awful lot of wealth that they may be interested in donating to your cause and your group. We pop up these anecdotal stories about the janitor at the junior high who, retires, and when he dies, his estate is $793 gigazillion, and he builds a high school football stadium with his name on it with the money, or whatever, those stories about the librarian, or, these things pop up every once in a while. So, had someone approached the janitor in my bad example story, had somebody approached that janitor, he's one of those guys that might have anonymously written a check for $10,000 a month, cycling back to my Bill Gates example. So hire good people, don't self-select out, and go after folks that you can find an emotional connection to. It's very difficult to force an emotional connection, and so you need to build a very wide net. And some of the research you do helps with that identification of the big net. But you're going to be more successful raising money from a broader diversity of people at smaller amounts than being dependent upon one big whale donor, which, everybody'd like to have a whale donor. If you know one, by the way, have him call me, because I've always got more investments than I can do too, and I'd like to find a whale investor too, but they're pretty few and far between. Yeah, it's and if I knew another whale investor, they would have an emotional reaction to whatever the business was that I thought they should invest in. They like it like I did for the reasons I did, or they thought my ideas and the reasons I'm investing in the business was incredibly stupid and they'll have nothing to do with it. So it follows that same spectrum of responses that fundraisers get to. So.
Well, and I love that you brought up diversity, because what we're starting to see, as especially as women transition into great wealth globally, that our traditional screening methods for identifying major gift prospects are falling short. They're not finding these non-traditional prospects who have wealth. So we need a different way of looking. We need different lenses in which to see non-traditional donors.
Well, and the other thing that that I know from firsthand experience is missed, is overlooked. The obvious target is family office money. The best example, I'm going to pick on the Walmarts because everybody knows Walmart. Sam Walton's great-grandchildren are living lives, got kids in school, and probably the vast majority of people they contact on a daily basis don't have any idea that they're Walmart money. Some of them, I'm thinking of one in particular, is an ego monster, and he tells everybody he's Walmart money. But most of them wouldn't. So when you think about family money, don't go ask Sam Walton for a donation. Sam Walton has kids. Sam Walton has grandkids. And if Sam Walton's great-grandkids happen to run in your 5K fundraiser, there you go. Now you've got an emotional connection. That, like you say, that non-traditional donor pool is hugely outweighs on an individual people body count. If you went around and counted the bodies, vastly overcounts the traditional Sam Walton, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, the rich guy who owns the NFL franchise or the car dealership in town, or, those obvious donors. I'm not saying don't reach out to them, but there's a lot of money anonymously next door and in less than status neighborhoods where you would not know that people have that kind of wealth. And if you build those relationships and make proper asks, you might find a nice donor, and that then might also surprise you by turning into the whale that you thought you wanted all along.
Yeah, that was a great example. I loved it. It's so true. Hiding in your 5K run list, or the parent list, could be a Walton that you just aren't aware of.
And it makes both a good and a bad example. I mean, the Walmart Waltons make a good example because everybody knows Walmart and everybody knows that they're the richest in the country and blah blah blah. But Sam Walton has great-grandkids too. And so don't tell somebody that you heard a guy on the podcast say, go stalk the Waltons' great-grandkids. That's not what I said. I want to get a phone call from the FBI or the sheriff of some county saying, we got a guy here in the jail who said you told him to go stalk the Waltons' great-grandkids. I don't want those phone calls.
No problem. But we'll spare you that. We won't do it. I promise. We're not stalkers. Well, what a fun conversation. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, and so the commercial is, find me on LinkedIn. I'm relatively indiscriminate in my social connection on LinkedIn. If you're curious, I'm Tim Horton, just like the coffee company, Tim Horton. No, that's not my firm. The Canadian Coffee Company is not me. If you search for me on LinkedIn, it's Tim Horton, COS. Chief of Staff, Tim Horton, COS. You'll find me the little cartoon face. I'm very private, so there's no pictures, but there's a little cartoon face that sort of looks like me in the Simpsons TV show. And send me an invitation if you'd like to connect on LinkedIn. And if you've got, the next Facebook, don't send me an email. But if you got an idea that's going to make you a billionaire like Mark Zuckerberg and you need a little help, well, then send me an email that I'm interested in.
That was Tim Horton, principal of Vector VC, a venture capital firm. For more prospect research resources, join us in the Resource Collections community at prospectresearchinstitute.org.